Hello, I'm Ellery Smith. I'm a composer, songwriter, pianist, and today I'm going to be breaking down what makes a pursuit theme so good in the Ace Attorney series. So, all of these games have a different version of a pursuit theme, but they all follow similar formulas and use specific compositional techniques to kind of make them feel like the same type of song, same type of soundtrack, just within the different contexts of the characters. So today, I attempted to write my own version of a pursuit theme for just whatever character, and I'm going to be breaking down the compositional techniques that the composers use to make them sound the way they do. So starting off, we got the beginning intro section, which usually begins by introducing an ostinato. So here's how I attempted to create my own ostinato. Now I know that sounds technical, but an ostinato is pretty much just a particular rhythm or phrase that gets repeated over and over and serves as the basis for the track. In the case of the pursuit themes, in the original game, you've got this rhythm. In the second game, you've got... These are the ostinatos that serve as the basis for those particular tracks, and every pursuit theme has some variation of a main ostinato that goes throughout the tune. So here's my attempt at creating my own. The next thing I did was the drums. I'm using the Apollo Justice sound font because it's one of my favorites. I think the Apollo Justice soundtrack is just so underrated, and I love the type of vintage DS era sounds, so I wanted to go for that kind of vibe. But yeah, the drum beat over these first 4 bars should just kind of build up into the melody. Then I started adding some strings to build up the intro on top of the drum beat. You can hear what it all sounds like together as I'm recording it through MIDI. Now it's time to record some bass. You really want to have a driving bass line for these kinds of tracks. It helps build the energy. Now we're moving on to one of the most important sections, which is the main melody. I started with the drums because it's easier to get kind of a backbeat for the section before you have to write the melody and the chords and everything. Usually you're always going to want to write these songs in minor. Every pursuit theme is in minor. They sometimes use Phrygian or Dorian modes, which are slight variations on minor keys. Phrygian is when you use the flat 2 chord, which is the chord that's directly above the root note, and Dorian is when you use the major 4 chord, which is like if you're playing in C minor, it's just like going from C minor to F major, and it kind of has a more triumphant feel. For this one, I went with the Phrygian mode. So I ended up writing some interesting chords for the first melody section. I think I was kind of inspired by the Apollo Justice Overtaken theme because it also uses the Phrygian type feel. But yeah, I think these chords provide kind of a cool epic sound while not being too basic or not being too simple, because the Ace Attorney soundtrack, it does have some jazz fusion kind of influence, particularly in a lot of the later tracks onwards. The composers clearly use a lot of interesting chords and compositional techniques to make it effective, which as a composer myself, I've spent so many years studying music theory in college. I feel like I might as well use some of the things I've learned, even if most music doesn't really need it. Recording the bass line took me a bit to get perfectly. Again, you really want kind of a driving 16th note feel. It just means playing really fast, like stuff like that will really help sell the energy of the track and make it feel epic. so now here's my first full repeat of the chord progression I have for the A melody section. Something interesting. I'm gonna lower. I love that song. It's so good. One of my favorite things about using sound fonts is that you can go through each individual sound and be like, "Hey, I remember that in that track and that in that track," you know. Because so many video game soundtracks have just iconic, unique sounds that really you can't find anywhere else other than in these sound fonts. And that Trucy Wright theme lead sound is so cool. I like it a lot. It's like vibraphone, but with like strings and like some choir or something and a synth. I don't know. It's just it sounds cool. Alright, now I'm going to write the melody. I found a sound that I like. Tricky one. As I said, now it's time to move on to the melody. The melody is one of the hardest parts. You know, I just kind of played it in because I had figured out what I had wanted to hear in the track, but usually it's much better to take your time crafting the best melody for your song, going note by note. And for these game soundtracks, they probably inputted everything through a computer rather than recording it through MIDI as I am. So, yeah, do whatever works for you to write the best melody you can, but for something like this, you want it to be epic and use a lot of sustained notes that revolve around the 1 and 5 of the key, because those are the strongest notes for melodies. Yeah. Adding delay and some basic effects is a good way to bring forth the melody into the mix and to accentuate it and make it sound a bit cooler and give it some more rhythmic contrast to the rest. A lot of these old game soundtracks actually use basic forms of delay and reverb just to, add some effects and to make it sound like it's in a particular kind of space. Now it's kind of time to add another synth part that adds more rhythmic interest while also reinforcing the chord progressions. Pretty much all these cornered themes have like some kind of synth part that is arpeggiating or playing chords out of the melody. Particularly in the original trilogy and in the Apollo Justice soundtrack, they're very synthesizer based and like kind of 16-bit sounds, so I wanted to kind of lean into that and create something that felt true to the spirit of the original game soundtracks. Now that I've completed the whole A section, or at least got a good outline of it, I moved on to the B section, started sketching out some chord progressions that I'd like to hear for the piece as it develops. I think things kind of got a little interesting here because I picked some chords that maybe aren't the most traditional for these soundtracks, but it sounds very Ace Attorney Investigations, as I say later, which... You know, the Investigations games use more classical type harmonies, like more common chord progressions like... It kind of reflects, how sophisticated Edgeworth is and all that. But the original Ace Attorney games are less classical, more jazz influenced and electronic influenced in their stuff. So, in their harmonies they use. So, yeah, it just kind of depends on the kind of character you're writing for and the series you're writing for to use different chord progressions to suit those environments. Here, I kind of scroll through some different drum kit sounds in the sound fonts to see if there's anything that might suit the track better, but I end up just going back to the first one because it is a good drum sound. The most important thing for these B sections is to just write something that contrasts with the A section. Here, I kind of go for, more classically sounding progressions, which are interesting, but you can do whatever you think suits the vibe of the piece. But the main thing is just create something that gives a nice change of pace to the listener while also keeping that driving energy and that that epicness that Pursuit themes have. You want the drums to do something different in this section. Usually you want them to kind of have a more consistent and normal beat and more rockin' beat that builds up. You really want the intensity to go up overall in this section. And it'll slowly build to a kind of climax where everything reaches the highest energy point before it loops. Sounding good. The track really sounds incomplete without a good bass line, so gotta add that in. This time I just copy and pasted the notes in because it's easier that way. Sometimes. Alright, so this is what I've written. Sounding interesting. It's sounding very like Investigations 4, so. Time to input the melody for this B section, so I start with that, with one of the synth leads from earlier, just kind of playing along with the chords. I like this chord progression, it sounds pretty climactic. One thing I noticed, particularly with the Investigations themes, is that the harmony starts getting more interesting as the piece goes on. It starts changing keys and modulating around, so I had some fun trying to kind of write that for this theme because it was starting to give me Investigations vibes. Who knows, maybe Capcom will make an Investigations 3 one of these days. We can only pray. Now it's time for the harmony part in the first melody. I decided to go backtrack a little bit and just kind of reinforce the A section because it is the most important section. It's the part that immediately sells the listener on the track, and it's the kind of most recognizable part usually of the track. So yeah, just I did like thirds and fourths, basic intervals within the key that harmonize with the melody, because this melody is pretty diatonic to the minor, besides the chords that are under it. But yeah, this is in G minor, and I just copy and pasted the MIDI for the melody and just changed the notes around so they're perfectly in sync. But I also added some slight variations in the rhythms because you want them to kind of be like a counter melody almost, that are working with each other and not just playing the exact same thing together. Particularly if you listen to the parts in the first cornered theme, there's like only a handful of voices because it was originally written for the Game Boy Advance, but the second voice is doing all kinds of crazy things. You got the first voice like da ba da ba but the second voice is like, you know, it's doing all these arpeggiations and complicated runs that help accentuate the chords. It's a cool part of the limitations of what they had to work with, because they had limited, when you have limited voices to work with and you can't just write a bunch of chords on top of each other for the harmony, you really gotta use every part as best you can to spell out the harmony, and to they all end up working really tightly well together. There's this VST that simulates the reverb effects from the Game Boy Advance and the PlayStation and the NES, and I slapped that on here and used the PlayStation sounds just to give it kind of more of a vintage video game reverb. It's called Game Verb. It's pretty cheap. I'd highly recommend it. It's very fun to mess around with if you're trying to make like accurate sounding old video game music. Now it's time to input the melody for the B section. I went with this kind of French horn sound, which I don't think was maybe the right choice, but I couldn't find that many lead sounds in the Apollo Justice sound font. But yeah, it makes it sound even more investigation-y. One thing you probably noticed is that when I'm recording MIDI, I always lower the tempo by a lot, just to make sure I'm inputting the rhythms and notes as accurately as possible. It's an easy way to streamline the MIDI input process, so yeah. Now let's listen back to the whole B section, what I've done so far, as Sholmes beautifully dances. I started to get a little worried that maybe this theme wasn't sounding epic enough to be a Pursuit theme, and I started to realize some of that has to do with the chords I chose for this B section and just the overall feel of the track. So maybe I was overthinking it a bit. I do tend to overthink things a lot, but I wanted to kind of work from the ground up to try and reshape the track to be the best it could be, because, you know, that's kind of the whole point of this exercise. I really wanted to do something that sounded faithful to the original games and do a complete study on the genre of Pursuit themes and how anyone would go about writing them. So, yeah, I changed some of the chord progressions up, and I add some more layers to try and cover up for some of the flaws, I think. But yeah, I think if you listen to the track in the state it was there, I think you'll hear what I mean. It sounds more like an objection theme. And objection themes are similar to Pursuit themes, but they just they're not supposed to be as epic or as high energy. So, yeah. One compositional technique that I realized I hadn't quite implemented yet was the ending section. Usually I feel like with these cornered themes, or at least the later ones in Investigations and in Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice, they have these ending sections that end with big hits, like in Keep Pressing On, you got that part again where it's like, you got those hits and stuff, and it just feels very climactic. So I wanted to do something kind of like that for the ending to give it that much more oomph and really sell it as a climactic final theme. And the bad guy, the killer, is going crazy, pooping everywhere on the witness stand. And now I'm like, oh my god, what have I done? You know, I have completely forgotten something that is essential to the blueprint of a cornered theme. And that is orchestra hits, man. Every one of these tracks has these cheesy sounds that you can find in sound fonts. Here's one on my keyboard. But they're pretty much just samples from like orchestras hitting their notes all together. So yeah, these sounds are kind of a staple of the Pursuit theme. You got the regular Pursuit theme, which has the whole build up at the start, and then you have the variation version, which usually starts with some kind of orchestra hit cue in, and then it goes in. But yeah, I started going through the track and figuring out where I could put in orchestra hits to make it sound more authentic. And now I just kind of went back to the first section, and I wanted to add some string background sounds that fill in the ranges that I think needed to be filled in the mix, and add some more epic orchestral underscoring to the track. This just sells it even more as an investigations type theme, because Keep Pressing On and Lying Coldly both have a lot of string type things, so I don't know. I guess that's just what my subconscious wanted to write, even though I'm using the Apollo Justice soundtrack. Go figure. Sound fun. I decided that the ostinato was starting to get a little too overbearing, particularly in the first section, so I cut it in half to the amount of times it plays, so it only plays kind of as like a calm response to the melody. And I think a number of tracks do this. Keep Pressing On usually does that, you know. It doesn't really have the full going throughout. It just, the melody goes and then it comes in. But yeah, that's the ostinato for Keep Pressing On. Yeah, and as you noticed, the ostinato drops out in the B section. It's not as important in the B section. That's something I neglected to mention. You don't have to keep that rhythm going throughout. You can switch it up in the B section. Just the A section is where it should be present throughout. I changed the chords in the beginning of the B section to sound less classical. Before, I was doing kind of like this 5 of 6 in minor key, where you go, which sounds very classical, but I changed it to just a minor 5, so it sounds more chill, but still kind of builds up a lot. So overall, I would say that the main characteristics of a pursuit cornered theme in the Ace Attorney soundtrack is having a rhythmic ostinato that repeats throughout the intro and the A section, a driving bass line, a minor key, a time signature of 4/4. I don't think any of them are in a time signature that's not 4/4. They might have a few odd meter bars. Um, and once it establishes a strong epic melody in the A section, it goes into a B section that provides a nice variation. Once it goes to the B section, it builds and builds into a final climactic moment with hits, orchestral hits, and a climactic chord progression that resolves it before the loop. So I think this was a fun exercise. I love the Ace Attorney soundtrack. I've been wanting to write music for it since I was little. I used to write soundtracks for OCs. I'm not even kidding. And I love these games. So if you'd like me to do more analyses on this soundtrack or any game soundtracks, please let me know in the comments. I really appreciate if you watched all the way. And now it's time to listen to the track all the way through. So hope you enjoy, and thank you so much for watching.